There's this great story in the Gospel of Mark. It says, as Jesus came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down. Do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. This is but the beginning of the birth pangs." What we have in this passage is a similar glimpse into the mind of Jesus that we read all throughout this gospel. Here Jesus is with his friends coming out of the temple in Jerusalem when a few of his disciples are caught up in the beauty of the structure that they had just occupied. "Look at that, Rabbi," they say. "Would you look at that? This building is just, well, this building is just stunning." It's at these moments when I read the Gospels that I want to pause and I want to employ a phrase that I learned one time on a trip to Alabama. It's a phrase I'm sure you have uttered yourself or have had uttered to you. The phrase is this: bless your heart. Even if Jesus didn't use that phrase, I'm sure that look was all over his face as the disciples described the magnificence of the building and found themselves enlivened by all that it represented. But Jesus, I'm sure, was wondering if they were ever going to learn anything he had taught them. It must have been hard to be Jesus, leading this group around, particularly when they never seem to get what he's saying. All throughout the Gospel of Mark, the disciples are constantly demonstrating to Jesus that they have not learned anything. Now, it's easy to pick on the disciples here, but in truth, they should give us hope and they should comfort us because they're a lot like us. Even though they're constantly and consistently hearing from Jesus what it is that he expects of them, it seems to go in one ear and out the other. It seems to me, as I read the gospel, that every time Jesus teaches them a lesson, there's another lesson to be learned right around the corner. The disciples are dense, and so it should come as no surprise to us that our passage here offers us another opportunity to learn at their expense. Jesus and his disciples have just been in the temple where Jesus had been making a point about temple rituals and overt legalism and clerical pride and the ways that the temple contribution system wreaked havoc on the poorest of poor. And then they walk out, and what's the first thing the disciples say? "Would you look at that temple, Jesus? Isn't it beautiful?" Bless their hearts. I mean, you can't really blame them. Herod had rebuilt a beauty of a temple. By all accounts, this structure was gorgeous. And I'm sure that being the good Jewish boys that they were, the disciples took one look at that grand structure that symbolized their religious system and they got a little teary. I'm sure that a little nostalgia kicked in. Perhaps they remembered the stories their parents had told them. They knew these stories, the stories about the Maccabean revolt, which concluded with a ritual cleansing of the temple and the reinstitution of traditional Jewish worship. They knew the stories of the people who had gone before. They knew what the temple meant to generations and generations of Jews. So despite what their rabbi was teaching them, can you blame them? I think I understand what the disciples were feeling. You see, when I was first ordained in the Presbyterian Church, I had just had an intense season of theological training and was well-versed in the history of Christianity in America. I knew the role that our denomination played in all that. I knew that our church had played a significant role in what would eventually become known as the Christian century. I knew of the stories of what had come before, of the women and men who worked hard to proclaim the name of Jesus in the most faithful ways they knew how, and I knew of all the good work that they had done. And despite the fact that I had also learned about the changing worldviews of particularly North American Christians, despite the fact that I knew that a postmodern shift was taking over the thinking of many people in the church and in the country, despite the fact that a Pew study would come out and name the fact that more and more people love God and Jesus and the Bible, but they don't like us very much, despite the fact that I was learning how white privilege has shaped and still shapes our church, despite all of that, I have to admit to you that I have spent a significant portion of my ministry looking at the edifice that is the 20th century Christian church and then turning to Jesus and saying, "Isn't it pretty?" Bless my heart. Because, sisters and brothers, I think that the word of the Lord for us in these days is the same word that Jesus offered to his disciples. It's all coming down. Later on in the text, a few of the disciples asked Jesus what he meant by all that, and he was very clear that there were going to be people who would come along and try to convince us that they were the ones that God had sent to save this thing we've been a part of. But Jesus warns them not to be taken in by it. He tells them that we're going to hear all sorts of horrible things happening, but don't worry, it's just the birth pangs of the new thing that is being birthed. Friends, listen, we're all invested in the life of our denomination. We've all seen the beauty of what the Presbyterian Church has been, and while we might want to strive to play nice and keep the peace, we have to come to grips with the fact that Jesus is right, and that even though it looks like things are getting bad, it's actually something pretty good. Something new is being birthed in the church and in the world, and the stones of the old thing are coming down. But this new thing in the church and in the world is going to rise up and take its place. I don't know about you, but hearing this story kind of makes me want to grab a sledgehammer and hasten the birthing of the new church and the new world.